Good evening and welcome to the first Scaramouche Sailing Trust and RYA webinar. And tonight we're going to be talking about increasing inclusivity in the sport of sailing. I'm your host, Mark Jardine, Managing Editor of yachtsandyachting.com and sailworld.com. And tonight we hear from Jon Holt, Head of Sixth Form and Outdoor Education Lead at the Greig City Academy and recently voted YJA International Sailor of the Decade. And also Hannah Cockle, the RYA Onboard Operations Officer. Jon and Hannah, great to see you both.
Thank you very much, Mark. We hope to share some of our ideas with you tonight.
Jon Holt and Scaramouche first made sailing news headlines back in 2017 when Greig City Academy were the first comprehensive state school to compete in the Rolex Fastnet Race in a boat they restored. Since then, they competed again in 2019 and they have an entry for the 2021 edition. The project is about more than the Fastnet Race. It's about using sailing to help engage with their students, transform lives and create a lifelong interest in a sport that is not common to children at an inner city state school. This evening, Jon will share his experience of what it has taken to bring sailing to a comprehensive state school in Haringey, London, and what key lessons he has learnt along the way. We've seen many sailing initiatives, although well-intentioned, appear to struggle with longevity and to engage students from state schools. We believe that the future of sailing as a sport will be enhanced if it draws participants from a wider cross-section of British society. Hannah Cockle, the RYA Onboard Operations Officer, will be talking about the RYA Onboard Initiative. We'll also be hearing from Greig City Academy students Jaden Owusu, Tyler Harriott and Kai Hockley. Jon is going to start things off with a look behind the scenes at the Scaramouche programme and the perceived barriers of getting into sailing.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm going to sort of do this by telling our stories. There'll be bits of it that that people know different sort of sections of, and I've been through the presentation and I have 21 tips for what you can do to maybe increase participation and perhaps other schools getting involved as well. Like every good teacher, I've got my pen and I'll tick off my suggestions as I go through. So to begin with, I think we have been on a journey which has had ups and downs, but has had a lot of success. We're not suggesting that everything we do is the right thing to do, but we are sort of suggesting that it works. So where do we begin? We have a local sailing centre at West Reservoir, an RYA centre, where we go dinghy sailing, and we do that several times a week with quite large numbers of students. A key part of what we do, and my first tip of it, is to get the students into boat work. One of the favourite parts we had of last year was young Jesse here getting a topper dug out of somebody's garden, restoring it, being coached by Harry Blowers down in Cowes, and then setting off on a personal adventure and journey of his own, sailing from Gosport to Cowes and then from Cowes on to Lymington. And you can see he's quite clearly inspired a lot of youngsters. For us, the boat work is essential because that's what's going to be necessary if they continue with the sport, which hopefully they will do when they become older. And then we have on one slide here quite a few sort of suggestions about what we think works. One of the key sort of reasons why our students have accelerated so much is to do with coaching. We have tapped into resources which are already there. So one of them, you can see Matt Reed here and Martin Evans, two very experienced coaches who've been through the system, very high quality sailors. And once you get the good coaching in, then quite often the sort of the ability of the students follows on. And one thing we've definitely learned is basically if we do get funding is to use that on coaching as opposed to necessarily just on boats. And then the other thing is that we have got a variety of other boats which are used for specific purposes. So our students have got a huge amount from sailing on etchels, and I think David Franks came up with a great idea for us, which was to, as he put it, put the cart before the horse. So get them onto boats which they would find challenging, but again with a good coach. And we needed something in between that, which is where where the squibs come in. So really, I think what's quite important is that the students sail on a variety of different types of boats rather than necessarily just one. Because of course what that does is, rather than them going to a sailing centre, going on a dinghy if they haven't sailed before and struggling, they then go on to a squib where they can be coached quite easily, and then swapping backwards and forwards on and off the dinghies, we think sort of accelerates their progress quite a lot. The other tip we have is about taking opportunities. So sailing, as we all know, is just full of opportunities, and opportunities come along, some of which you think are good ones, some of which you sort of wonder, are they going to have much value? And this is one where young Casey here was invited to be a 4th crew member on a Dragon with 8D sailing, and that opportunity, well, you can see from there that they won. But what that then led on to was other opportunities that came along. So on that one, I think Jesse and Kai both went out just to really keep him company, but ended up getting 5 days of coaching with Matt on a Hobie cat out in France. So that was obviously a great experience for them. We're quite well known for some of the other things we've done. We mentioned already, we've done the Fastnet twice now, and that is quite a big part of what we do with Scaramouche. There was a lot of questions over whether we'd chosen the right boat, and I have a sort of, I suppose, a bizarre bit of advice for anyone thinking of getting into sailing with schools, and that is to follow the advice that Mike Golding gave me, which unfortunately I ignored, which was not to buy your own boat. I'm glad we did. We bought Scaramouche, and as you can see, Scaramouche needed quite a lot of work. All the students had to do talks to raise the money. Replacing the deck was probably the biggest thing that we did. But then for us, it's worked really well. We had Laurie Smith came out sailing with us, and I think had we been on a more conventional boat, maybe that wouldn't have happened. But there's what we have learned through the events we've taken part in with Scaramouche is that there are huge numbers of organisations out there with big boats. They are fully risk assessed, fully coded, all CRB checked, all that kind of thing, and they're just a resource which is waiting for schools to come along and take up that sort of opportunity. So with offshore sailing, we've gained a lot. We did the Fastnet, but one of the students who's really benefited from that has actually been Jaden.
Now, Jaden, offshore sailing is tough. You were very young when you started this. How did you end up sailing offshore?
So my first experience of sailing was going offshore on the Ascot race from Ramsgate to Gosport. I was 13 at the time and I loved it. In one race, I learned the importance of concentration and being part of a team. Because of our concentration and boat speed, we made it around all the tidal gates. We only made the last one by about 15 minutes. It meant we won the race by nearly 10 hours. This experience changed my view of school because all the things I learned in school, we actually had to do in the race. In 2017, our older crew were the first comprehensive state school to compete in the Fastnet race, and they came in the top half of the fleet. They are all now in university, so in 2019, it was our turn. We did way better than them, and I'll explain why. In our qualifying races, it was far more rough. The first race to Le Havre wasn't just longer. Once we got to Normandy, there was a 4-hour slag back out again before the finish. We were much younger, so we had to prove ourselves in all the qualifying races. Before the start, we had already done more than 900 miles. The Fastnet race itself was very rough, sometimes with winds over 40 knots. We saw some of the favourites retire, so we had to dig very deep and try to finish. We did finish, and coming into Plymouth, it was one of the best feelings we've ever had.
Jaden, that's an amazing journey. What would you say have been the biggest benefits of your experience offshore?
Well, Scaramouche is a very old boat with old technology. To race Scaramouche, you have to know about running backstays, dip pole jives with big masthead spinnakers. So if we manage to get onto a bigger boat, we can come with some experience.
Okay, so that had been Jaden's experience of being offshore, and one of the polls that we've got has asked about which type of sailing do people feel is the most beneficial. And of course, it's one of these things where every type of sailing, as we know, is beneficial. I think what would be important to stress about the offshore from a school point of view is how amazing it is, that feeling at the end, that the satisfaction is very much at the end rather than during it. As I said, I think one of the key benefits of offshore is how accessible it has become, where the superstars are very keen to be involved and to support. And I think this is a good example was Alex Thompson Racing, who gave Montel the opportunity that they did. But of course, they then invited our younger students. I think Jaden and Kai and Tyler are all in that picture somewhere, much younger. But then the opportunity to go there and see a boat like that clearly makes it incredibly exciting for them. And I think there was one weekend that we did where we not only went there, but then went across to Ineos's base shortly after that. So that's been a great sort of thing about offshore sailing. What we've found out is that a lot of the longer term opportunities have come through the bigger boats. It's not to say it's the best way of doing it, but if I just think, for instance, that Camillo, for instance, is now a regular crew member on Redshift, the Fast 40. Montel has taken all of his experiences, and you can see him there doing a super yacht delivery down in the Mediterranean, and then coming and helping and supporting with our sort of younger students as well. With offshore sailing, I suppose for us, there's so many other benefits. If we're going to introduce sailing a bit more into state schools, then inevitably the question is going to be, well, what are the other benefits? And I think one of them is that in schools we're constantly almost bombarded with stories about how a student could become a solicitor or could become an accountant or something like that. But of course they do offshore sailing, and like you can see in one of the pictures there, they see the Coast Guard out there doing a training exercise with us, and then you can have the great experiences back at school about, imagine if your job was to go into work, to save somebody's life. So you have those sorts of very powerful kind of things, and of course there is all the banter side of it that comes in. There's Jesse up there with his ketchup trying to liven up his dinner offshore, but doesn't necessarily always work that way. So we've had some really good experiences sailing offshore. But I suppose if we were asked about other types of sailing that we do, there's others that I think give quite a lot of interest.
So we've seen the very real opportunities which yachting has led into. Tyler, we've seen quite a few unusual boats racing around the Solent. I think we've seen an E-boat, grey limbo, and the name Riot kept cropping up on the racing circuit last summer. Tyler, what is the story behind Riot?
Well, Riot is a mini tonner, and it's one of the areas of sailing where I've definitely learned the most. For very little money, we have in 1980 Intro 22, which me and my teammates Kai and Jane are responsible for. Our job is to try and make the boat as fast as possible, as well as keeping the IRC rating as low as possible. You can see one of the things we did, which was fitting the bowsprit so we could fly an asymmetric spinnaker, as well as symmetrical spinnakers. Some of our ideas work, however, some don't. As an example, we fitted the same asymmetric spinnaker system to Riot that we had on the 29er. We got a 49er sock and set up, but it didn't work. In rough weather, the spinnaker was being dragged out of the sock, which cost us a lot of time. We did the worst and hardest job in the world, which was filling and fairing the boat, especially the hull, which required a lot of work. I hated doing that, but if it makes a difference of a quarter of a knot, it was worth it in the end. In our last race, which was the Isling Sailing Club Christchurch Bay race, we finished third, and if we had a quarter knot faster, then we have won. So it looks like we'll be filling and fairing again when the lockdown ends.
I gotta say, having gone forward in XOD before, I know exactly what that feels like. So yeah, feel for you there. And Tyler, what are your plans with Riot this summer?
This summer of Riot, hopefully to get back into sailing, and we'll definitely start the jog racing series, and hopefully fill and fair the bottom of the boat again.
Fantastic, and back to the bottom of the boat.
Yeah, so the mini tunnels have really been a highlight of our season. This is a picture taken by Rick Tomlinson, and one of the things it does is give the students an immense amount of sort of ownership over what they do. As Tyler said, they fill and fair the boat. Those sorts of skills are very important. They now wait for, when we try and get an IRC rating, that they wait for the results of that in the same way they might wait for an exam result. But It's really helped there that they also have to talk to the industry. They got a new set of sales from North Sales, but even that is great because they then start to see other jobs and other careers that they could get. A couple of other kind of suggestions I have about the great thing about sailing as well is that I mean, that picture was taken by Rick Tomlinson. He was very sort of willing to provide that picture, high definition picture for the school, and of course schools love that. They can then use those in prospectuses on their websites and all that kind of thing. One thing that they did learn, I think just after that picture was taken, was also about different tactics. And in fact, one of the most successful tactics when they came second was actually they went round, they finished third in a race, and I said, how did you do that, what tactics? And they said, oh, there's a boat called Minim, and he knows what he's doing, so we just followed him. But it worked, so I was quite pleased that they did that. The mini tonner is also one where we have certainly learned from our mistakes in a way, in that this was the first sort of attempt we did at that, a boat we brought off eBay, and in the days when we weren't maybe as knowledgeable about these as we were, poor Azat and Sean there spent hours and hours and hours, and Alex and Samuel as well, getting that boat sorted, getting it ready, and it was just not the right sort of boat at all. But then what we did was we took the right advice, and I think certainly if there's any teachers out there watching, it's very important to take the advice of the industry, of people who really do know what they're talking about. So this is the e-boat. This was Eros, which was found in a school playing fields in Cowes. It was very old. It was on I think it was on a rib trailer where the supports pushed through the bottom of the boat. But over a long period of time, they got that boat ready, very low rating, and then they did really well. We didn't ever have any idea what the benefits of that would be. And these opportunities just seem to arrive in sailing. So this was a good example where they did around the island race. They missed the finish by 15 minutes. That's them coming into the finish, just the middle picture at the top. So of course, should they carry on, should they not? They carried on because they were given advice, by Simon Rowell to just keep on going, which they did. And as a result of that, they crossed the finish line. But then there was a major benefit, which was that Ross Appleby was just behind them in a folk boat, and he was so impressed by the fact that Sean, who was helming this here, didn't give up, and then he gave them the opportunity to sail across the Atlantic on the Ark, and they did that, and of course they then won. And he just continued after that, doing more and more races out there in the Caribbean, and we actually had a job trying to get him back actually in the end. There's then also a few other aspects of what we do. We have a girls program which has started and which is gathering pace at the moment. It's been affected quite a lot by COVID, but it's a project aspect of the project which is clearly very important. One thing we haven't learned a huge amount yet about the girls project in our school in sailing. What we have learned from them is that they very much want a project of their own. They don't want to be shoehorned into the boys project, which is already there. So using again the right advice, we're slowly getting there with that aspect of it. One of the major things for me though from sailing is determination, and we talk about this a lot in school, about the fact that the students should be resilient and that kind of thing. This is a picture, the top right one was taken. We'd just done a talk to Sport England, and we set off for a weekend of Etchells and squib sailing. We got onto the M3, and that was what we faced. And I kind of said to them, look, I think we should go back. This is not really going to happen. And they were determined, no, we're going to continue. It will be okay. I had nightmares of us having to spend the night on the M3 with that. But then, of course, we did carry on, and they were rewarded with a great kind of weekend of sailing. And I think what they've really learned from there is to keep going. And one of the major lessons for us is that it's not just about winning races. Sometimes maybe carrying on with a race and not just giving up has as good a feeling sometimes as actually doing well in a race itself. And another thing we've learned very much is this one picture with the Etchells here shows a huge amount about lessons we've learned. A key one is that not everybody in a school wants the same thing out of sailing. So Javon Knights, who's helming there, he wants to do a super yacht hospitality course at UKSA, which he'll be off to do. Jamal in the middle is quite happy crewing on an Etchells, being a middleman on an Etchells, which is what he wants to do. And Azat down at the front down there, He is a borderline obsessive. But also where, again, they've had some great experiences there with different coaches, and there's Gonzalo in the picture there as well. And of course, the other thing for them also has been their determination to do it at all costs. And again, we finished a race to St. Malo. I think we gave them about 3 hours off, thinking they would just go and sit on the beach. And then we saw these catamarans flying across, and of course, not just a few hundred yards off the beach. This was France. So they basically set off back across the English Channel again. But what we found is that, again, all these, from an offshore race there, we arrive in a different country, they seek out the sailing there, and there's a good lesson for them to learn there as well. And the other one is, again, I keep on saying a sort of a tip here, but how amazing the sailing world has been in terms of advice. So when Montel got his opportunity at Hugo Boss, you know, he was the best person to give him advice about what to do and how to make an impression. Of course, you know, Mike Golding was absolutely fantastic from that point of view of really helping him through that and giving us the advice that he did. And finally, with terms of dealing here with, I suppose, the bigger boats, is the importance of these qualifications. So it sounds a little bit like a very sort of teacher thing to say to young sailors, you know, you should be doing your qualifications, you should do the theory. But for us, for our students, this is very real, because of course, if they get their day skipper, that means that they can then go and be a mate on a sunsail boat where they're paid. So suddenly they've got a part-time job while they're at university and gaining experience of not just sailing itself, but dealing with corporate clients and that kind of thing. But there's a very important aspect of the project though, which, Kai.
Just before we go on to the next section, we've got a poll. Hannah, could you set up our first poll?
Yeah, sure thing. It's ready to go. So this is going to pop up on your screen, and it's probably all you'll see, so it will disappear. And you can just click on your screen with your answer, and we'll leave it up for a couple of minutes to give everyone a chance, and then we'll share the results.
So
the
what
question
type of...
is, sorry, Mark,
Okay.
you go.
Okay. What type of sailing do you think we can learn the most from? And you've got the little tick the boxes there where you can either put in dinghy sailing, small keelboat sailing, or yacht sailing. So if you could each select that.
Yep, so the results are coming in. At the moment, 38% dinghy sailing, 26% small keelboat, 36% yacht sailing. 84% of people have voted. Just give it a couple more seconds in case anyone else wants to vote. So 89% of people have voted. We're looking at 37% have said dinghy sailing, 26 small keelboat, 36 yacht sailing.
Very interesting. So a broad spectrum there.
Yeah, I'm going to try and share the results. Apologies if this doesn't work.
As always with these pieces of software, it's just trying to work out what button does what. But if we can't do it now, we can definitely do it later. And Hannah's already shared the results, so we've heard the results, so we'll be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm going to close it and hopefully it will pop up on screen, but who knows?
Well, we're back to the slides at least.
I can read you the final results anyway. So 91% of people voted. There's 117 people on the webinar. So 38% said dinghy sailing, 27 for small keelboat sailing, and 36 for yacht sailing.
Many thanks indeed for that. Now, we've heard a lot about the project's achievements with the bigger boats, but what about dinghies? Kai, I've seen you sailing in and out of Lymington with the laser fleet. How have you found the dinghy scene?
In 2019, I was the youngest person to do the Fastnet race. but I wanted to prove myself in dinghies because all of the big names in the sport said to become really good, we should compete in dinghies. So a year ago, me and Jaden got a 420 for £300. We trained in the Solent last January in a freezing cold for weeks. This boat introduced us to crab racing, but then I realized how finely balanced dinghy racing is, and our weight wasn't right for the 420. So we handed the 420 onto Azza and Tyler. I now sailed the laser radial. The highlight of the season was when I took part in the UKLA qualifiers. I trained for 2 days and then entered my first big race. This was a completely different world to what I was used to. I had to learn everything in 1 weekend. I hadn't done many things before, like tallying in and out, launch with so many boats all at once. Just getting to the race course was hard. I had to make my own pre-start routine. And once I started, I had to remember all the stuff I practiced in training. In the first race, I was second from last, but I was just glad to get around the course. In the second race, I was fifth from last. In between the second and third race, I decided that I wanted to be higher up in the fleet. So I coached myself, and in the last race, I beat 15 boats. I started to realize how great the racing community is. In between races, Lorenzo would sail past me and give me some tips. Another thing I had learned is to listen to the advice of others who have been successful. Harry Blows did a podcast about his laser sailing, and it motivated me by showing you can come through the fleet and get to the top. I was all geared up for the nationals, but then it got cancelled because of the weather.
Now, Guy, that must have taken a lot of courage just to get out on the water and do that first race. But the improvement that you've shown since then and what you've learned is incredible. Now, what are your plans for 2021?
I want to carry on racing in the laser and trying to improve for 2021. I want to be in the mix in the big laser races.
Well, with some of the advice that you're getting from people like Lorenzo out on the water, I'm sure that's going to happen, especially seeing your determination and what you've achieved so far. Now we've got another poll, and Hannah, I'll let you read this one out this time, since that's what we'd agreed.
Yes, and I've worked out how to share the results as well, so I can do that there. Bear with me. Okay, so this is our second poll. What do you perceive to be the greatest barrier to get into sailing? We've got 4 answers: access to water, cost, complexity of the sport, or social injustice. So we will give you a moment to pop your answer in. Cost coming out very much on top at the moment. So 84% of people voted. I'm just going to give you about 10 more seconds to get your answer in. Okay, I'm going to share the results. There we go. You should be able to see that. So 12% have said access to the water, 42% have said cost, 23% complexity of the sport, and 23% complexity of the sport, and 22% social injustice. Those are obviously not the only 4 things that might be a barrier, but it was just interesting to see what people's perceptions were.
Okay, now we'll move back to John, where we've got a bit of a summary.
Okay, so the Hannah, is it your slides next, Hannah?
Oh, yes, Hannah.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so for those of you that don't know me, my name's Hannah Cockle and I work for the Royal Yachting Association. I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking to you about one of our participation programs on board. It's one of many participation programs that we run, including things like Sailability and Discover Sailing, and they're all supported by other initiatives. For example, the Sport England Tackling Inequalities funding, which is sort of quite a current one, as well as wider RYA support. But this evening we're going to focus on board, and this is our grassroots sailing and windsurfing program focused on juniors. So on board has been around since way back in 2005, and since then we've had over 900,000 first experiences on the program, and we currently have about just over 285 venues delivering the program. In 2017, we decided to give the program quite a big refresh, and we started working with this guy that you can see on screen here, Professor Bill Lucas. Professor Bill is from the University of Winchester and the Centre for Real World Learning, and he is an expert in learning capabilities and certainly a strong believer that sailing and windsurfing and challenging activities such as sailing and windsurfing provide the perfect context for kind of broader learning and the development of valuable life skills, a couple of which Jon's already mentioned so far. So Bill talks a lot about the idea of having a growth mindset, and there's a tiny diagram there. I won't expect you to read it, but having a growth mindset is, an example would be seeing challenges as helping you to grow, and taking feedback is quite constructive. And then on the flip side of that, you have a fixed mindset, which is more seeing failure as the limit of your abilities, or you're either good at something or you're bad at something. And it's important to say at this point that you're not either one or the other. You can definitely flip between the two or have attributes from both. But it's something we really want to encourage in our young sailors and windsurfers. I hope you'd agree. So in 2019, the Department of Education released guidance for character education in schools. And this is something that had been on the radar and we were aware might happen for quite a while. But this really proved that we were moving in the right direction with On Board, and especially its relevance within schools. So we worked really closely with Bill and we developed these 6 character attributes, which we felt were particularly enhanced with sailing and windsurfing in young people. I'll talk more about those a little bit in the next slide. And since then, so for the past 3 years really, we've been really busy producing resources and delivering training to help support clubs, centres and instructors embed these character attributes within onboard training sessions. So probably the most popular ones have been our session cards, which link one attribute to a kind of whole day's worth of training on the water and really bringing those attributes out in your young sailors or windsurfers. Thanks, Jon. So just a little bit bigger then, these are our 6 character attributes. So independence, communication, creativity, teamwork, determination and confidence. And behind this sits lots of other things like remaining motivated, having positive moral attributes, social confidence. But what On Board really wants to do is to create that context for learning, which can be applied to other areas of life. So it's kind of going beyond sailing. What can you take away from this? And some of these sorry, Jon, go back. Some of these really resonate with me. So particularly teamwork. My honestly first memory of teamwork was at the sailing club at Beer Beach. And if you've ever been to Beer Beach, you know it's super steep, pebbly, and it shelves off into the water. And when people are coming in, you've got to really work together to recover everyone safely. And I really remember that sense of camaraderie and achievement of getting everybody out and talking about the race or whatever we were doing afterwards. And certainly determination has turned me into the person I am today. Those cold, windy days on the water with only the promise of hot chocolate when you get back in. So I think we can all agree that these attributes can be developed from those challenging activities, those challenging days you face, as well as the good ones. Thanks, John. So we had this kind of theory, these ideas, and nobody was disagreeing, but we really needed to prove it. So we commissioned some research in 2019 with the University College London, and the aim was to robustly prove that sailing and windsurfing had a positive effect on young participants. So we had some really good key findings. Luckily, the research went really well. The first one was onboard sessions contribute to participants' wider personal and social development. This includes enhancing their social skills with both peers and adults, maturity, ability to accept responsibilities, and concentrate on tasks. The second one was onboard sessions are enjoyed by almost all participants and engender feelings of fun and freedom. The third one was a really powerful one for us, that onboard plays an important role in tackling social injustice. It provides unique experiences to those from disadvantaged backgrounds and can help develop self-confidence and open up further opportunities. The fourth one was participants felt more supported by their peers. They also felt more relaxed and confident in themselves following an onboard session. And the last one was onboard sessions particularly develop the attributes of teamwork, communication, and confidence. But course leaders and parents also noticed that learning to sail was challenging fun and about much more than just sailing. So 5 really powerful key outcomes there. And this is just my last slide, a kind of visual infographic representation of some of the other amazing, powerful stats that came out of that research. So 82% were able to work better as a team. They're all really positive stats shown there, and we can send the full impact report out after this presentation. That's it from me. Whistle stop tour of onboard. Thank you.
Many thanks indeed there, Hannah. And now we're going to be moving on to Jon for his summary.
Okay, so I suppose the real point, I suppose, is that, there's the sailing world itself at the moment, we feel has got all of the infrastructure there to really engage and benefit, young people from inner city areas and from state schools like ours. There's absolutely no question in our mind that the sailing world has got the will. We've obviously had lots and lots of assistance with equipment. We've had lots of people who are from the classic sailing areas who are really supportive in terms of safety, providing safety cover. People like Nick Hopwood, Tony Osborne, who are really keen to do that. So the whole sailing world, we feel, is there. And we feel that it is generous, it is kind to people who want to go sailing. But there are, I suppose, a few things which need to be kind of understood, I suppose, to really try and accelerate this through schools, because of course there is the classic fairy tale idea that a young student would get a bug for sailing and then go off and do it at their local sailing club, in the evening. But the reality, of course, in the inner city areas is just simply not like that. If someone is going from in the top left picture, from an inner city area, they travel to a school like ours. You can see the old McGregor out there. And then from there, maybe they might, if they were particularly keen, they might go on to the sailing club. Okay, and then of course they go back again. But of course, quite often in reality, that's going to be when it's going dusk or possibly when it's dark. And this is the reality of a young person's journey home. And of course, one of the key barriers we found is engaging parents, because clearly if they haven't got a full appreciation of the value of the sport, then it's possible that they won't be doing the picking up and dropping off. Maybe they don't understand that the benefits of them training as hard as they need to. And of course, these sorts of journeys home in an evening from a sailing centre is not necessarily safe, and something which parents would want young people to be doing. And this is actually the circle there sort of shows an area of between West Reservoir and where most of our students live, and it does go through an area of the UK where the crime rate is twice 200 times the national average. So So it is certainly a major barrier. I suppose the question is what would be in summary, what would be our answers? So this is a bit of a clumsy slide, which has got the classic journey in the left-hand side, in the blue one. And of course, there's nothing wrong with this. I suppose sailing is such a successful sport in the UK. I don't think anyone, and none of us certainly would, feel that the blue column, there is anything wrong with it whatsoever, that there are there's local dinghy sailing, they go to the local club, they race on one evening and on a Sunday maybe. Then from that, the regional training camps, the qualifiers, and of course at the top of that, would be the youth squad. The green one is the reality of a young person who's going to want to get into sailing or going to get into sailing from a school like ours. And the reality is it's going to come through the school initially, because quite understandably, if their families are not from a history of sailing, they won't necessarily understand the benefit of it immediately. So normally they will turn to the school for suggestions. And certainly as a school, as you can imagine, we offer suggestions. We continually suggest they should try the sport. I think we've been proven that it's been a good bit of advice. But then they've got to go away, of course, on school sailing trips. So if there is going to be this issue of going to and from the local sailing centre, especially late in the evening, then really the school trips to places like Lymington, like the Isle of Wight, to these sorts of centres are going to be a good way of doing it, where they get 5 days or 3 or 4 days of training, quite intense in one go. And then of course they could hopefully then do what we managed to do, which is to make a strong link with a local club. Now, we made a very strong link with Lymington Town Sailing Club. They've been absolutely amazing for us, and that's then led them into the regional training camps and races, and then on to, in Kai's case and Jaden and Tyler's, the nationals and the qualifiers. Of course, that goodwill already exists. We know clubs are ready to do that. So I think one of the important things is that the message needs to go to schools. We don't feel personally that sailing actually has a lot wrong with it. We just feel that maybe people aren't taking up the opportunities sailing can provide, not just through cost, but really through a knowledge of the benefits of doing it. So we do have one final suggestion with that, and that is maybe to have on the green column here, one number 6, and the number 6 might be that there is a squad, call it a development squad for want of a better word, and with not very much infrastructure. It could be a very aspirational squad that the young sailors could maybe aspire to be in. I don't know exactly how it would be selected. It would be certainly students would do the existing races. There wouldn't need to be a need for more qualifiers. The existing races are already there, but maybe the top students, maybe ones who are from sort of schools of a certain sort of type. Maybe it's done by, I don't know, free school meals, something of that nature. But then there is a squad they can qualify for, in which they train, not with, but maybe perhaps alongside the actual youth squads, and then just see how good they can get. All it would take would be the existing infrastructure. We know through what we do that the knowledge and the coaching, the high quality coaching, is already there. It's already, we've seen it with Matt Reed, with Martin Evans, with Harry Blowers. We've seen that that's already there. And I think it might be just a small tweak, which might make quite a big difference for young people. So that's our story. I think I've gone through all my tips. There are just 2 more that I have. And one of them is about asking. I know in the poll, there was a big sort of focus there on cost. And of course, there is a cost element to it. I have run different sports in the school before, and there are a lot of costs associated with other sports, which people maybe they're hidden costs. But what we found out that with sailing, if you ask for things, quite often people are willing to give them and to help. I mean, Spinlock, amazing, Selden, amazing, all these different organisations who've really helped North Sails, and that has helped really to drive that cost down for us. And I'm sure it would be the same with other schools as well. And the other one is actually the press. Now, I'm not just saying this because Mark is listening, but one of the really good things for us has been that we feel that the press and sailing are very nice, and they're interested in what we're doing. And almost every stage of what we've done has been championed and documented in the sailing press. And you can imagine for a young student from an inner city school and for the school as a whole to suddenly see their project in a national publication is something which clearly helps to boost it quite a lot. So our key thing is we feel that the infrastructure is there, and we would just like to try and get the message out there to as many schools like ours as we possibly can.
Well, Jon, thanks for the comment there. And actually, in the questions, we've had a lot of offers already from other areas of the industry, including the RNLI, for experiences and also offers of equipment. So yes, the will is definitely out there. Now, we've had a load of good questions come in as well. Jon, from Charles Derbyshire, what other areas of school life have been positively affected by being a school that sails?
I think so there's the actual students who are involved in the project itself have, as they I'm sure will tell you, have a lot of focus on their performance in school, because they have to have some days away, not a huge amount, but that means that they have to be up to date with their work and all that kind of thing. I think the key thing for us has been that sailing is perceived to be a very outlandish, a very, very adventurous sport to do. So because of the fact we've done it, I think there's a mixture of, first of all, the staff are very proud of the students who do it. They get their weekly update of some amazing adventures that they've had, and as we know through sailing, all those adventures are completely different. But I think what it's done is it's given a lot of younger staff a bit of confidence to go and try things. So I feel there's a bit of an issue in schools. When I was at school myself, all the teachers were doing extracurricular activity of some sort, whether it was climbing or fishing or walking or whatever it happens to be. And I think that's gone slightly from schools. And I think by doing what we've done, a lot of our teachers are quite keen to try other things. And I do have an interesting sort of meeting with them where inevitably they come to me and ask my advice. And when they ask about risk assessments to take a group to the local park, I do sort of give them a bit of a reality check that that's not really as dangerous as as risky as doing the Fastnet. So I think it's benefited, given a lot more teachers some confidence, I think.
That's fantastic. So it's actually just developed the whole teaching staff's sense of adventure, really, and getting everybody out and doing activities. So we've also had a few questions coming in tonight. We've got Jane Kingsnorth, who has struggled for years as rear commodore of an inland sailing club to get young people racing. And you've been successful in this, where instructors have tended to stress fun over competition, which is also fun. What is your secret?
Well, schools have got different focuses, and there are some schools that are competitive, some are non-competitive. Ours are very much competitive. I mean, we deliver sailing as a sport, and we've found that our students really enjoy the racing. They feel they learn the most. They go and they visit the Alex Thompson Racing. They visit the Ineos team base. They see all of these ex-world champions racing around on Etchells, and they see the sort of the glamour of all that. And I think they just want to be part of that. And that's one thing again about the sport, which is it's just so straightforward to get access to people at the top of the sport into racing. And I think they are very inspirational people. I mean, Freddie Carr came to our school to see Montel and Camillo just to give them a bit of a boost. So I think by getting them close to or involved with people at the top of the sport has really helped with that.
Well, we're all watching Freddie out in Auckland at the moment as part of Ineos Team UK and wishing them all the best. Now, Max Muddy has said, would you ever consider scaling up your operation to a bigger vessel and longer trips with more young people? And would this include chartering rather than owning a bigger vessel?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's also mirrors what Mike Golding correctly suggested to us. And if any advice I would give to another school who is thinking of starting sailing is to charter, not just charter a yacht, but maybe even go and use some of the other sail training organisations which are already there and already coded, already set up. I'm glad that we did get our own boat. In the end, that's been the route for us. But I think maybe that was just needed to get the ball rolling with maybe sailing in schools like ours. I don't think we ourselves would go necessarily for a bigger boat, partly because we can't afford one, and also for us there's an important balance between getting a boat which is a lot bigger, but it then might mean that some of the crew are doing less and they're maybe sitting on the rail a lot more than they might otherwise do. The great thing about Scaramouche, as Jaden said before, is it needs so many people to sail it that everyone's doing something, whether it's running backstays or anything, something like that. Everyone is doing something. So I think for us, Scaramouche is probably the biggest compromise that we will go to in terms of them actually still sailing the boat. We have, of course, experienced what I think the poll suggested before as well, is that there's so much learning on smaller boats, especially the mini tonners, obviously dinghies as well, that I think really our focus is doing a lot of that and then going up to boats as big as Scaramouche. To go to boats beyond that, really, that's where we would get them hopefully as trained as possible, and then somebody else with bigger boats will take them on a stage further.
Now we've got a question come in from Marina Harden, who has been involved in sailing with young people of all backgrounds through sail training, tall ships and adventure training, sea cadets, etc. Young people have really benefited from their experience, but it doesn't seem to always develop beyond young adult years, possibly due to cost, social standing or support. How does the panel think that this can be addressed so that sailing is engendered into adult life as sports such as football and cricket? Hannah, do you want to start with that one?
Thanks for your question, Marina. I think it's really, really important that we as an industry provide pathways for people to carry on, even if it's not necessarily in sailing. So the easy answer is, you know, become an instructor, go along that pathway, and that can lead to great career opportunities. But you don't necessarily have to be on the water to stay within the industry. So it might be that you're getting into a boat building industry or something similar. So it's important that we kind of point people in the right direction depending on what they're wanting to do as they sort of go into adult life.
And I think what I would say, there's several things. One is to get them to do the boat work early on, so they can see that you can take a fairly low cost boat and get it so that it can be sailed and raced. I mean, with Kevin Downer in Cowes, he introduced us to the mini tonners, and I suppose what we have done is we've walked them through the whole process of taking a boat from being a donated boat, from being where it is, to being a boat that could potentially win races on handicap. So then it's fun for them. So I think, and it's realistic as well. So if you just take our students who've moved on, a lot of them, there's Montel, Camillo and Samuel, they now have a Hunter Sonata, which they will be sort of running in the same way they run Riot. These boys run Riot, and then that then means that they have got a boat which is realistically costed, and they can then continue with. I think the most important thing is to introduce them, any young person, to as many different types of sailing as possible, because it might be that the type of sailing they've been introduced to they like for a short period of time, but they might not last long term. But it could be that they try all the different types of sailing, and there's just one of them that they like and one of them they want to carry on with. And ultimately, that's probably all they really need to do to say that they're a sailor in the future.
I have to agree with you both there, and particularly when it comes, the cost was mentioned there, and the entry level to sailing doesn't have to be expensive, and doing the boat work on a boat does mean that you know that boat back to front. And the laser that I sail, well, it cost £27. I've done a fair bit of work to it since, but it does mean you get to know that boat very, very well, and it can at times be competitive, but I think that's probably, when I'm not competitive, it's more down to the helm than the boat. So yeah, you can definitely get on the water, and spending the time on a boat is hugely beneficial. Now we've got Simon Lovesey, who a lot of people will know from Restart Sailing, which has given a lot of advice during COVID, who said sailing is one of the few participation sports that can be enjoyed by all ages and abilities and across most demographics. Sadly, to the outside world, we are seen as a rich white man's privilege. What Jon and the team have done is fantastic and shows what can be achieved, but how do we scale this to change perceptions?
I think it's more of what's already happening with some organisations at the moment. So Sail Juice is a very good example of an organisation which really helped. I mean, Kai talked about some of those issues he had initially with just understanding the mechanics of how the weekend works, and they then were very helpful with that. The jog organisation was superb over the summer, really making it so that we could get involved and in a very safe way. David Franks came up with the idea of putting the cart before the horse with us and putting in the right sort of coach. There's so many examples. Redshift, another one, introducing young sailors of ours onto their program as well. 8D Sailing, even out in Portugal, which is nothing like as expensive as people think to go there. A Redjet ticket is the same price as a flight there. That they have also been providing opportunities as well. I think the key thing is that those opportunities continue, and maybe some other sailing organisations do what they've done. You know, Redshift is not the only Fast 40, obviously, in the UK. There are others who could do the same, and then I suppose after that, it's a massive effort to get the message out there into comprehensive state schools that this is what is at the end if you choose to get involved in the sport.
We've got time for one last question, and Rob Henderson has asked, how would you convince the head of sports at another school to do what you have done over a more straightforward sport? Getting the top level help from the sailing world has been achievable for one school. How does that translate into a realistic plan for tens of schools, for example?
So one of the sort of debates I have with myself about this, and in fact with Nick Hopwood, who helps advise us with what we do, was that are we right to do all of the different types of sailing that we do? Now, we are glad we do that, but that has made it much more difficult than what it maybe needed to be. So again, I think there is a need perhaps to liaise with the senior managements and head teachers of schools, but not to suggest that they have to do every type of sailing. So some schools might want to just do once a year a big boat sailing with an organisation like the Rona Trust or someone like that, and do it as their DAV expedition and be non-competitive. Others may want to do dinghy sailing and nothing else because they just perceive it's going to be a bit easier to get equipment round and be a bit more competitive. Some may want to just hire a sunsail boat and go out on that, or a Fairview yacht and go out on that. I think the key thing is phrasing it, packaging the sport in a way where you say, these are all of the different things you can do. These are the people who can help you do it. You know, getting them involved, whether it's with on board or whatever it happens to be, and then they go ahead and be happy with that. I think if we go to schools and say you should do inshore, offshore, yacht racing and all this kind of thing, then they're going to be maybe scared away by it. But just one aspect of the sport for them is probably enough and probably achievable. And we know that the resources and the advice is there if they want that.
And Hannah, this is part 1 of 3 webinars, and we're going to be dealing with the issue of connecting schools with resources that are already out there and centres that are out there. What do you have to say on that question?
Yeah, so I think firstly that is a really, really good question, and obviously what Greig City Academy are doing is kind of really pushing the boundaries and showing people what's possible, but to kind of scale that to more schools is another challenge. I think the best thing to do is for schools to connect with their local centres to see what's available first. And as I mentioned earlier, schools are increasingly looking to do things that will cover more than one part of their aims, I suppose. So if you can show that sailing builds teamwork and confidence, etc., that's a real bonus. It's another layer to taking the kids out of school and doing an activity that is fun, and they're going to learn sailing, but they're going to get so much more out of it. And yeah, just connecting with your most local provider is the first step, I think. and for your provider to get you along as teachers or head teachers and show you what's available.
Well, it's been fantastic tonight to hear the insight of Scaramouche, what the RYA on board provide. And I think it's really the starting point to getting a lot more people out on the water. We have 2 more webinars in this series, and we'll be sending out details of those shortly. But I'd like to thank John, Hannah, Jaden, Tyler, Kai, and also behind the scenes, Lou Johnson's put in a huge amount of work into helping this happen and getting us all together. So, and thank you very much indeed for everybody who's attended this webinar, and hope you have a good rest of evening. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.